way things are from a couple of years on, things are real horrible here in New York, all over.
You're dealing with a lot of people that are maniacs today.
We're dealing with an individual who's very basic, who only knows two things, rip off or be ripped off.
Many of those who make good by being bad are nowhere to be seen these days.
I'd be afraid. Of course I'd be afraid. He's a sick guy. He'd kill any time.
Yeah, but we're
There isn't anything on earth that I will hide from or back up from.
People seem not to understand the close relationship between organized crime and street crime. And certainly in dealing with street crime in his area or any other kind of crime, the uniformed patrol...
Presenzano, shot 4 times, his throat cut. Presenzano was allegedly connected.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of NYC Crime Spot. I'm your host, Brett, as usual. If you're new to my channel, welcome. Please subscribe, hang out for a little bit. So some of you might find this location a little familiar. Some of the OGs on the channel that have been with me from the beginning. Back in 2021, I came here as part of my first video profiling the Pennsylvania Avenue dump and the Fountain Avenue dump. However, that's been 3 years. That video is buried within my catalog. Not many people commented on it anymore. So I figured, hey, why not come back? Talk about the history of this place again. Talk about who may have ended up in this place. Talk about some of the history revolving around this place. Some of the violent criminal history. And basically just do a complete walk and talk. Last time it was kind of like a half documentary, half walk and talk. This time, we're strictly outside. It's a beautiful day, so let's get to it. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and yeah, see you in a minute. All right, everybody, getting a view over there of the Spring Creek Towers. We are above the, well, we're above the Belt Parkway, but we are up atop the former site of the Pennsylvania Avenue dump, or the Pennsylvania Avenue landfill. The 110-acre site, which now makes up a portion of the Shirley Chisholm State Park here in East New York, Brooklyn. Let's get another look at the Spring Creek Towers, completed in 1974. We're over there in East New York. Up to the left over there, you got Canarsie, straight ahead East New York. And then if you were to go more to the right in the distance, you would get into more of the Howard Beach section of Queens. So we're straddling the line right here between Brooklyn and Queens, high atop the former site of the Pennsylvania Avenue dump. So throughout the 20th century, we'll stick with the 20th century, New York City has had numerous ways of getting rid of trash. And we're going to be talking about those ways. Let's get up here, though. Let's look down into the pits. Down into the pits of the dreaded, the hated, the infamous Belt Parkway. Looks like yeah, it's moving all right today, actually. Not too bad. Not too bad at all, ladies and gentlemen. If you ever come to New York City, try to avoid that. Try to avoid the Belt Parkway. Try to avoid the Long Island Expressway, too. So some of the ways that New York City would get rid of trash, well, we had things called incinerators. What is an incinerator? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. They would bring garbage there to incinerate. They would burn garbage. They had numerous sites throughout the city which they could accomplish this. And in apartment buildings throughout the city, people who lived in those buildings could actually use that building's incinerator to burn their garbage right within the confines of their home. Of course, it would go out through a chimney into the air and poison everybody around. Perhaps the most famous incinerator in New York City was the Inwood incinerator. If you guys remember those smokestacks way up top in Inwood, way up top in the northern tip of Manhattan, that was the Inwood incinerator, opened in 1934, and it would close in 1970, way up there on 215th Street. I believe they recently actually took those down. They said that there was an issue apparently with a wind incident, they called it. I guess maybe a disaster averted that they don't want to tell us about, right? Another way that they would get rid of garbage would be to bring it out to sea. These beautiful bodies of water, beautiful no more, because they were sending barges out there to dump garbage. But what kind of situation did that create? Let's get down. What kind of situation did that create? Well, it created these garbage-filled, artificial shorelines in Long Island, in New Jersey. People got fed up with that shit really quick. So by the 1930s, they said no more dumping garbage out to sea. We could still hang on with the incinerators for a while until the late 80s, when incinerators were completely banned in New York City under the Koch administration. Bye-bye incinerators, bye-bye out to sea. But of course, we still had landfills. This landfill that we are walking on right here would actually close in 1980. And the landfill that we are going to be going to on the other side would close in 1985. Now, New York City also had another landfill that was not in this location, that was in the Staten Island location, the Fresh Kills landfill. 2,200 acres of garbage, the largest landfill in all of the world. That actually predates the location that we are at right here. That opened in 1948 and was not closed until 2001. And it was the largest landfill in the entire world. Imagine that, 2,200 acres of garbage. Unbelievable. So let's talk about these landfills here. So as I mentioned before, this landfill here, the Pennsylvania Avenue landfill, 110 acres, opens up in 1956. A few years later, on the other side, we're going to have the Fountain Avenue landfill, 297 acres. That would open in 1962. And once again, this was the city's efforts to figure out a way to properly dispose of garbage. Of course, that would create tons of issues. What do you see next to me? You see water bodies. Decades and decades, we would have waste leaching into these water bodies out into Jamaica Bay. So you have to the left, we have like Hendricks Creek, we have the North Channel, up ahead we have Fresh Creek. So for decades, what would we have? We would have PCBs leaching into the water from motor oils and electronics, phenols, all types of disgusting, toxic waste would leak out into these waters. And it would leak out for decades. You also had a situation of the garbage was so high here that it was attracting seagulls to this area, which they say was interfering with the many planes that were around here. You see a plane right now in the distance. Of course, we are not far from JFK. So the seagulls were becoming an issue here, so bad that they let some of the staff members have shotguns on site to shoot up at the seagulls to scare them away. That is how much they said that these birds were messing with some of the planes incoming to JFK. Of course, later on we had some incidents with geese. The Miracle on the Hudson, anyone? So birds have always caused us some problems here in New York City when it comes to aviation, unfortunately. So by the late 1970s, many of the people who lived in the surrounding areas of these dumps got really fed up. People living in Howard Beach, people living in East New York, most notably the people living in Spring Creek Towers, many of them who looked out their window over the Belt Parkway and observed this 100-foot high pile of garbage. Not only that, but the many smells, the many fumes from the toxics were making its way into the air in the surrounding communities. Children and adults living in Spring Creek Towers and Howard Beach were complaining of asthma, complaining of respiratory issues. Local politicians started getting involved in the efforts to shut this place down. And by 1980, right here, Pennsylvania Avenue dump was shut down. Right behind me, over the Hendricks Creek right here, the Fountain Avenue dump. The infamous Fountain Avenue dump right over there, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be going over there and we're going to be talking about why it is so infamous. Some of you already know. Let's make our way over there. Let's talk about some of the more bizarre history, some of the more violent history of the surrounding neighborhoods and of right here inside the dump. See you in a minute. All right, guys, walking over the bridge here. We got the Belt Parkway next to me. We got the creek over here to the right. We are heading to the Fountain Avenue dump, which is the other portion, as I mentioned, of the Shirley Chisholm State Park. The larger portion, the 297-acre portion, and the portion with the darkest history. So after these two landfills would close, this one in 80, Fountain Avenue, that we're heading to now in 85, the city would come in here, they would put topsoil down, they would essentially cap it, is how they refer to it as, capping the area. They were covering up what was here before in an attempt to make the area better, I guess hand the land back to nature. Throw some topsoil, try to cover up some of the bullshit that was going on over here, and who knows, in many years, maybe this thing could get better. Ultimately, it did get better because we're walking here right now. So what they would do in the early 2000s is they would start putting down this plastic netting over this whole area. They would put down more fresh topsoil, and they would plant hundreds of trees all over this area. And by 2019, this area opened up to the public. The Shirley Chisholm State Park was now open for public consumption. People can come here, walk the paths, ride bikes. I believe there is even a bike rental spot that I actually walked through back there. There you go, there's the name for you there. All right, so we are entering the Fountain Avenue dump right now, ladies and gentlemen. Here we are on the other side of the water there. Look up there. And we're going to be talking about some of this history here. Right there in the distance, you're getting another view of Spring Creek Towers, also referred to as Starrett City. And right there, you're getting a look at the Pennsylvania Avenue dump. We were just right there. Now we're over here on the Fountain Avenue side. So you're getting a view of that from this side. And we're going to keep walking. We're going to get higher up on this Fountain Avenue dump. And we're going to be talking about some of the dark history. So the surrounding neighborhood of this area, this East New York area, has historically been known as a place where violent crime has taken place. Either violent crime has taken place here, or the victims of violent crime have been brought here for disposal. It is reported that dating back to the Murder Inc. days, guys like Lepke Buchalter and the sort were using these areas to get rid of human remains. Fast forward to the 1970s. Most notably the late 1970s into the 80s, the infamous Roy DeMeo crew, who operated out of 4021 Flatlands Avenue in Flatlands, Brooklyn. The crew that I have spoken about at length on this channel, of course many of you know that. Ultimately, this whole area, believe it or not, of the Fountain Avenue dump would become historically tied to Roy Albert DeMeo, the Gambino gangster who ran a vicious crew out of Flatlands and Canarsie. responsible for, in my opinion, 80 to 100 bodies. Some people say 200 bodies. I don't believe any of that. I think that's nonsense. I think 80 to 100 is enough, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think we need to add 100 more because it sounds sexy. You know what I'm saying? Not to mention, many of the bodies did not end up here. So in the late 1970s, at the height of what became known as the Empire Boulevard operation, the operation where the Roy DeMeo crew were stealing cars here in New York City, shipping them overseas to Kuwait, at the height of that operation, that is essentially the height of the violence that this crew would commit. The violence that gave way to their reputation and the violence that gave way to the loss of numerous lives. Some of those people ending up right here at Fountain Avenue. Now, how did that happen? Well, as many of you know, in the back of the Gemini Lounge held the apartment in the confines of 2084 East 41st Street. And inside that apartment, many men would meet their end. They would be dismembered, packaged up, put in little boxes, picked up by Anthony Center's uncle's sanitation company, and they would be sent here along with the other garbage that was ending up here. It's important to know that half of the trucks that came in here to get rid of garbage were private sanitation. The other half, you had city trucks coming in here. So you had a mishmash of different companies coming in to this area. One of those companies owned by the Vulpes family, who is related to Anthony Center. And this is how this idea is hatched, that we could dismember these bodies in the back of the Gemini Lounge. They could be put in these boxes, placed in the cart outside the lounge, picked up and delivered right here. So on the thumbnail of this video it says, who ended up here? Some of you might be aware of the murder of Danny Grillo, which occurred in November of 1978. Of course, the robber, the truck hijacker, the man who was there for the killing of Ruby Stein with the Westies, the man who turned into a DeMeo crew member, a murderer, a compulsive gambler, a man who lost his life due to his compulsive gambling in November of 78. He would be dismembered in the back of the Gemini Lounge, brought right here under where we are now. According to Dominic Montiglio, he would say that he went to the Gemini Lounge to look for Danny Grillo. Chris Harvey Rosenberg kind of laughed him off. He went inside, asked Roy DeMeo, hey, where's Danny? Roy DeMeo said, if you want to find him, you could check the Fountain Avenue dump, where we are right now. We also have the May 1978 murder of Mikey Muscles, a man who I've spoken about on this channel, a known pederast, a man who was caught up in pedo rings, a man who ended up in the back of the Gemini Lounge losing his life, dismembered, buried right here under where we are right now. You have the October 79 murder of Khalid Dowd and Ronald Falcaro inside Broadway Freddy's garage. Ended up right here. How about the March 1979 incident that gave way to the Cuban crisis? The murders of Charles Patnick, Jamie Patnick, William Serrano, and two of William Serrano's Cuban associates, ripped off by Harvey Chris Rosenberg, murdered, dismembered, brought here to the dump. Once again, this gave way to the Cuban crisis. It cost Harvey Chris Rosenberg his life. It cost the life of 18-year-old Dominic Rigucci out in Long Island. That is a story for another time. Some of you already know that story. Now, the one thing I will say in terms of the Roy DeMeo crew members and, you know, this whole dismembering, hundreds of bodies behind the Gemini Lounge, I think we need to chill out with that. First of all, it's important to know that many of those bodies were never dismembered. Many of them never ended up here at all. Actually, a large portion of them were left to be found on the streets. You want to talk about what is reported to be Roy's first murder, the murder of Paul Rothenberg. You want to talk about the murder of Andre Katz, didn't end up here. You want to talk about the murder of Joseph Joe Bikini Bracchini, didn't end up here. Vincent Vinnie Mook Governara, Mickey Spillane, John Quinn, Cherry Golden, Daniel Conti, John Costello, Patrick Presenzano, Scott Cafaro, Charles Mongator, Daniel Scudero, ended up in the trunk like many of them. We could go on. Paul and Al Vigiano, shot dead in Canarsie. All of these bodies didn't end up here. So I think it's important to kind of, not step out into the world of unrealistic and inflate numbers. As I said, 200, 250 bodies. They're all chopped up in the back there. I don't buy it. I'll never buy it, this 200 body number. And listen, it is a fact that most of them did not get dismembered. So just a little rant. If you've been following me for a while, you might know why I did that little rant. Of course, this is a topic of great interest for me, and another reason why I wanted to come back here and revisit this area after 3 years, the Shirley Chisholm State Park. We are currently on the Fountain Avenue side, formerly known as the Fountain Avenue Dump. The cemetery, the makeshift cemetery of many a criminal. Many a criminal. Now, of course, that does not mean that some of the people that ended up here always deserved it. I would argue that some of them did not deserve it, and the rest we could leave up to interpretation. When you speak about a Mikey Muscles, when you speak about a Danny Grillo, and things like that. Now, aside from some of that dark history of the mob and Roy DeMeo's antics in this area, we have also had other situations that have occurred right outside the confines of this park. Some of you might remember the February 25th, 2006 incident, which involved Darrell Littlejohn and Emmet St. Guillen. Emmet St. Guillen was a John Jay graduate student. She was 24 years old, and on February 25th, 2006, she was at 218 Lafayette Street, the Falls Bar in Manhattan. And one of the men working there, a convict who had served 12 years in prison, who was on parole, who was not even supposed to be working there, not even supposed to be out at the time he was out, way after midnight. Somehow he ends up with Emmet St. Guillen. And by the end of that night, Emmet St. Guillen would be discovered outside this area here at Seaview and Fountain Avenue. Her body would be discovered. Darrell Littlejohn would go down for this incident. He is currently in prison for life, right where he belongs. And of course, the Falls Bar would close not long after that. Here we have a little stack here, not sure what this is about. Let's get another look at the Fountain Avenue dump here. Now, not far from here, just on the other side, on the Howard Beach side, we have Spring Creek Park. Some of you may remember a 2013 incident, which was the murders of one Gary Lopez and Rudy Superville. They were murdered by a crew who law enforcement referred to as the Bushwick Crew, who operated out of Brooklyn. Some of you also might remember the 2016 murder of the young, beautiful 30-year-old Karina Vetrano, a Howard Beach resident, also found in Spring Creek Park just across the way there. Crime committed by Chanel Lewis. Of course, a lot of people have debated whether or not he is actually responsible for that crime. That is another topic for another day. So just some more of the dark history surrounding this area and the immediate area. In the year 2000, when the Gateway Center Mall was being built, just over the Belt Parkway here, adjacent to Starrett City, construction crews would come upon the remains of 2 individuals. They would find a skull and the remains of Eve Brown, a Long Island resident. Today, some are attributing that crime to suspected Lisk, Rex Heuermann.